So how exactly were you able to figure out broadcasting multiple 4K and 1080p channels on ATSC 1.0?
Okay, so to answer your question, Tyler, I guess it's starting from the top. It's worth mentioning that my background is in video in general, so networks, IP, video over IP, all that kind of stuff. And sitting home over COVID with a new television in my living room, bought a 4K, Ultra HD set, it really prompted me to look into a bit more deeply, how stuff is actually formatted and how stuff really works over the air, over the physical radio channel, and all the way up from there. And in that discovery, in that kind of research phase, I realized that there might be a way to get something that wasn't expected, maybe some newer codecs over the air. Into this set, and wouldn't it be interesting? I thought if it just happened to decode it, and so doing a bit of research, digging around and seeing what is happening elsewhere in the world, got me interested in pursuing, this line a bit more deeply. And it starts with, some lower cost digital cable modulators that had IP inputs that I could feed, trivially or easily from a laptop or something like that as a convenient source. And then, proof of concept later or two, I realized that, yeah, in fact, I can get some of this, advanced codec stuff, the ABC codec on PEG-4 video, as well as HEVC, transported over some network and come out in clear QAM or cable format. And then I thought, well, if that much works, why not try ATSC 1.0 over the air in a radio channel format? And so what could I do with that was the real guiding question here. And the answer was what we're seeing here, what we're talking about now. And that is being able to, not just transport one or two, high quality program feeds or something in ABC or HEVC, but turns out, tens of or dozens of these things can fit over a 19.3 megabit payload. So that was the result of all this inquiry, but it really does start, simply with just things sitting in your living room, TV on a stand, and the question, what can I do with this?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So what all are you broadcasting on that one single RF channel? To my understanding, there's multiple 4K and 1080p channels.
That's right. That's right. So the formats can change, week to week, month to month in terms of the lineup and what I'm broadcasting. But generally and consistently in the last, say, 6 to 8 months, I've had 2 to 3 1080 channels, so 24p or 30p, and then 7 to 8 720p channels, and that could be a range of frame rates from 2397 or 24 frames a second up to 60, depending on the network or the program, and then 3 to 4 2160s. That's the 4K, advanced format kind of stuff we're talking about here. And so at any one time, right now, Channel 3 has had 14 programs going in parallel. And so, that's kind of the limit at the moment until, some technical things can be adjusted and worked around. We have to be a little conservative, if you will, in terms of how we pack that in with a bunch of interesting technical limitations, but they all come down to the magic words, variable bitrate management. And anyone in the broadcast audience listening to this interview can appreciate the challenges in meshing, multiple dozens of different sources that have all moment to moment different demands and bitrate and so forth. And in the way that we're doing it, there's just some practical limits in how that can scale out. But ultimately, this is really a question of how we can feed, or rather divvy up this 19.3 megabit pie, if you will. And so in the current case now, the array and the breakdown of 720, 1080, and 2160p programs is just what happens to fit the pipe at the moment. But if we had a network opportunity or a new content opportunity for licensing some interesting stuff, that could shift around, in a matter of days or hours, depending on how I want to program and structure things on the air.
That's pretty unbelievable that you're able to have, you said 12 to 14, what would you say, 14 channels on the single RF channel?
Yes, that's right today, as of Tuesday in March here, 2024. There are 14 programs playing.
And most of them being HD. That's absolutely unbelievable. Now,
Well,
one question I have, understanding that it's all new codecs that you're broadcasting over this channel, what TV sets are able to actually pick up either the AVC or the new HEVC 4K broadcasts?
yeah, well, so great question, Tyler. It was interesting to me to discover this as well. And starting from the top, I looked at, four major lines, flavors, if you will, of Ultra HD TVs first, figuring, okay, if it's an Ultra HD TV, it's got to at least have HEVC. And to my surprise, pleasure as well, they discovered that all of these had AVC support, of course, as well as MPEG-2 for standard broadcast. And so the four families I started playing with were LG, the CX55s, the thin OLEDs, Toshiba TF43 series, that kind of Toshiba Amazon hybrid that's out there, so-called Fire TV edition, Vizio V series, and then Samsung 43-inch or larger Ultra HD series as well. So separate from that list, we've had feedback from viewers confirming that Sony, Bravia, and whatever UHD recent releases they've been purchasing or using in that market also display and decode the HEVC and AVC programs. So it really seems that if you have a newish TV that is Ultra HD, it does them all. And if you have a somewhat recent-ish TV, let's say 1080 kind of class with a smart TV feature or two, it probably supports AVC as well. And this seems to go back maybe about 10 years. So let's say anyone with something, newer vintage than say 2012, 2013, 2014, something in that area seems to start also supporting AVC as well, up to 1080, of course.
That's my understanding too, because in New York City, WPIX just shifted two of their sub channels to AVC or MPEG-4, and most people had absolutely no problems. There were a select few people hanging on to some old plasma TVs from the early 2010s or even like 2008 era that were not able to decode the channel. But for the most part, I've noticed, and you even said yourself, that most TVs and set-top boxes will decode AVC. And then we're not talking HEVC 4K. We're talking
Right.
at least AVC MPEG-4 1080p channels on your broadcast signal.
Right. So, and also to add to the conversation here and confirm, even if we've had, limited support in the sorts of displays I've seen, for example, portable sets are popular in different parts of the world. So I picked a few of those up. And again, to my surprise, they supported HEVC and other advanced codecs, but only up to 1080. And interestingly, many of these things will do stuff that's just completely not mentioned or undocumented in many ways. So to me, it's an interesting experiment to try. And so, in ways that I try to encourage viewers to get creative with this stuff, what we find is that it's helpful to have, and actually importantly, FCC compliant to have at least one channel, like the main program, say the .1, encoded in MPEG-2 and decodable on anything stretching back to 1996 or whatever the vintage originates for MPEG-2 video. And so having that at least lets us say, have some slate or some sort of informational graphics up to say, look, this is going to be, working at least on 3.1. If you don't see other pictures or sound on other subchannels, you might have a TV that can't support that. Try a different tuner, try a different playback device, what have you. Some sort of an engagement mention or mechanism there is seemingly helpful. And that can sometimes prompt someone to say, oh yeah, this thing has been on my wall for 15 years or however long. So.
Yeah, that's just all. It just blows my mind that, you're just this guy. I mean, not to sell you short or anything like that, but you managed to figure out how to broadcast 4K over the air and not even needing ATSC 3.0, but ATSC 1.0. How come you don't think any other broadcaster seems to have stumbled upon this?
Well, I think, there's fits and starts, and as you mentioned, in New York and Chicago, I'll highlight a couple discoveries there. There's ABC and also Houston. Wherever I put a tuner down, HD home run for monitoring and my own market knowledge, I do see one or two stations doing something with MPEG-4 ABC. But I think that the hesitance and the resistance, if you will, in the industry right now is it's one of those cases where the first mover is just going to pay the most. They got the most to lose, maybe in terms of viewership, because again, you have to have an ATSC3 ecosystem end to end. So the crypto stuff, all the DRM stuff layering on, playback devices have to be in the community. The A3SA is gatekeeping in some ways. And why would you risk your viewership access and everything else to this new format that really has, a limited to maybe a really minor population that can receive things today? thinking back just a bit ago, some months ago, LG announced, their intentions and their statement on what they thought of ATSC3 implementations for the next wave of sets for 2024 and maybe a bit beyond. So if that's any hint at where the market manufacturing side is in terms of this ecosystem or kind of this gestation cycle, I think that gives us a pretty good feel for what's on their minds. And that is, what's in it for us? Why do we care? What's it really going to do? And maybe there's some modest improvements in the physical layer, and that can be rationalized and seen to improve the broadcaster's likelihood of being received and gaining access to an audience. And as a technical guy, as an RF backgrounded guy, I can appreciate everything that's gone into the interesting conceptions of coded OFDM for what will be that physical layer. Totally love what's happening optionally there. But from what I can tell right now, the driver is not density of pixels. It's not going towards higher resolution programming. It seems like it's going to move and tracking towards more channels, more sub channels, more program channels, more free ad supported, whatever the heck. And picking on one station in Houston, they have 19 programs. So you think, Tyler, 14 is interesting or impressive in some way. There's a 19 program broadcaster in Houston, and it's all in Pig 2. It's all 480. They're not trying very hard in the way that we're trying here in terms of resolution, picture quality, and so forth. Their goal is just spray it out, make it bigger, wider, sell more ads, presumably sell more inventory for these channels. So if that's where things are tracking already, I have a hunch it's kind of where it's going to lead first. And in my mind, I just thought, anything that's already happening, flip the script. If it's already happening in the market, I'm going to compete against that. So on the merits, I'm not going to win. Let's try something completely different. And that's where this whole 2160 or more resolution interest comes from. And as you know, and the audience probably appreciates, 2160 is not the limit of any of this sort of thing. We can actually go even higher resolution, 8K or what have you. And so that's what's on my mind here, kind of entering into this whole discovery phase, deployment, what's potentially available to use and to construct as a technical enabler, and then see what that might lead to from a content opportunity and everything else. But again, to kind of compactly, state what's on my mind there, I think the challenge for most broadcasters is what's in 2160. What things are going to be produced and distributed in a way that I could get on air. And maybe that's sports right now, and I can think of one other source on public broadcast, and that's NASA's Ultra HD feed on a handful of satellites around the world. If you can believe it, like they actually have 2160 24/7 off of their carriage agreements with whatever they have for capacity on transponders. And I actually have a receiver in Eugene, and we broadcast NASA to air in glorious 2160, and it covers all the live events that they have produced in 4K. So I can think of that and, cinema and movies. And maybe some, NESN, ESPN kind of sports produced kind of stuff. So not a lot. And so what's a broadcaster faced with? Well, producing their own, stuff in 2160. What's that going to be? The news hours? It's a hard sell for the technical requirements and refresh costs and everything else to put, talking heads in 2160. It looks cool. It's great. I think it's awesome. Technically, that's just me. All right. So, in terms of market and value, it's pretty moderate to maybe low on their minds. And I think that, again, if anything, it's just going to be density initially.
Yeah, well, you have a very good point about the lack of 4K programming. There's not much of a reason to switch to 4K over the air if there's very limited things to broadcast. But you have a good point. I didn't think about the fact that not a lot of markets, but in some markets, certain TV stations are transitioning to the more efficient MPEG-4 ABC codec, which we've seen in Chicago and New York City. Hopefully the other TV stations start to do the same thing, because then that means they can fit a lot more TV stations on one RF channel and better picture quality, pretty much exactly what you're doing on your signal, except that yours is just all ABC and HEVC, while theirs is mostly MPEG-2, the inefficient codec from the 90s, and then a few AVC channels. So that's a very good point. I never thought about that.
Yeah, well, thanks, Howard. And that's a good segue back into just describing a bit more what's on, the air right now or day to day. So of the 14, all the programs are 720 or higher resolution on channel 3. So if you were using a HD home run or whatever with little iconography that shows, channel map and layout and what's on what, everything just says HD, which is kind of cool. So there's no question about what you're going to get. It's going to be something that looks decent, is what I think the viewer might find there. And then, across that array, from dot 1 through the last of the block, you'll see 720, 1080, and 2160. And so to compare, what we see broadly out there, a handful of these, call it lighthouse stations, will absorb and take over the ATSC1 compatible broadcasts, allowing something presumably to then take over or be kind of the lighthouse for ATSC3 transitions. And we see a lot of interesting horse trading right now in terms of who's jumping on whose, call it payload capacity to make the structure workable for the markets that they're serving. And so it seems like it's making ATSC 1.0 look worse in cases where stations did have a 1080 or 720 primary channel, and then now they're a lighthouse user or shared tenant, if you will, and they're at 480, let's say, or 720 or something along those lines at lower bit rates. And there's been, several other video bloggers out there that I've seen and actually spoken with about this phenomena where, this transition to ATSC 3.0 is currently making 1.0 look worse in the places where it's been done like this. Of course, that's to say, and back to your point, it doesn't have to be like that. We could say, okay, industry says, and developer and hardware providers all say, okay, we're going to embrace MPEG-4 as a transitionary thing to ATSC3 and maybe make 1.0 work a little bit more interestingly, usefully longer. And I feel like that could happen, and it seems like it's developing on its own organically, which is kind of exciting. And so, to your point, if I have an option of spending a megabit or two on some program, it's definitely worth my time to try to get that into AVC format, just from the picture quality alone and the efficiency around all of that. And I've also, worth mentioning here, discovered that we do have some potential robustness improvements in the decoder side. For folks in fringe areas, MPEG-4 out of the gates had what we call slice-based encoding support in pretty much every decoder I've seen, which means the broadcaster can partition the frame as it sees appropriate in their encoder, meaning that if one data element or object doesn't decode successfully in that overall frame, the whole picture doesn't necessarily have to break up or become errored. You can have recovery kind of built into the program over time. And so this is a major departure from MPEG-2 concepts, which didn't require this clever slice-based encoding. So I like the idea that even if we're not going towards a higher bitrate delivery thing, and we're not going to try for higher resolution, higher quality things, maybe we can make ATSC just a bit more robust and less viewer, unfriendly, let's say, in fringe areas. So I love to exploit those sorts of technical features in these advanced codecs, and of course those all come through to HEVC as well. So that to me is another example of where 1.0 isn't really like a nail in the coffin kind of moment anywhere that I can see.
Yeah, I feel the same way too, because it seems like pretty much everything that the broadcasters are pushing with ATSC 3.0 can be done on ATSC 1.0, but they don't. Now, I'm sure there's some conflicts of interest where some broadcasters don't want people to know that. They want to push this new standard because of all the patent royalties that Sinclair can make and A3SA and all the money going around. So I definitely see that. But yeah, you make a very good point, and who knows where things can end up in the next 5 or 10 years. But hey, all valid points here. I really appreciate this. Anything else you want to share with my viewers?
Well, thank you, Tyler. I just want to encourage everyone to, contact your local stations if you can, if you still have any left in your markets that aren't already owned by the nationals. Ask them if there's programming that you could work on, you could volunteer and help with. I mean, we see this a lot in so-called telethon, begathons for, supporting public radio stations. I think there's an interesting opportunity here where the technical enablers, really can help reconnect, I think, some of the markets that maybe don't have the content that folks want to see. I think as an example that I would love to have your audience know more about here, Channel 3 really is just about, call it just-in-time programming and call it rapid programming, call it fast flux if you were to use some marketing terms, meaning that we can do things technically now because it's all just kind of an IT problem, data playback problem, and you don't have a whole studio and network, call it ball and chain, dragging you down in terms of production types and styles. And so I encourage your audience to think about how, if they can do anything for their own selves, if they can really improve their own lot, it would be, please reach out and let the broadcasters that you care about know that you're interested in supporting that in some meaningful way. And maybe that means getting involved in a variety of different capacities, sometimes content, sometimes technical, sometimes just raw funding. And if they know that people are out there interested in these sort of things, I think that's a better cycle and call it a closing of the loop than we have today, which is just whatever advertisers are paying for inventory and getting maybe commissions on telephone sales or what have you. So if there's a different model that be had here or a different sort of call to action, I would definitely encourage anyone listening or hearing this or seeing this to really ask, hey, maybe I could be bored one day. What would I do if I was in Anton's position? I mean, what would I get involved in if I had some free time? And maybe apply it in this area. Because right now I just don't see a whole lot of people like me rapidly running to this area to innovate or to work on things. And I think it's just ripe for that opportunity right now.
A very good point. That's exactly how innovation happens. You get some, like-minded people together and just start brainstorming ideas and start pushing it over the air, which is what we're seeing on your station, hopefully on more stations in the future. So, yeah, thanks
Absolutely.
again for taking the time to answer all my questions and very good video. I'm sure my viewers there will enjoy it.
Great. Thanks, Tyler.